The ping came in at 0317, ship local, while I was the only one awake in the comms bay. That is not unusual on a patrol frigate 4 months into a low-priority sector run. The Carrow was not a prestigious posting. She was 8 years old, mid-tonnage, and assigned to the out-of-Earth corridor on what the duty roster called a presence and passage mission, which meant we moved slowly through empty space and reminded no one in particular that Earth had a ship out here. We had been reminded of this ourselves, routinely, by the silence. Nothing had hailed us in 11 days. So when the board lit, I sat up. It was a compact emergency beacon. I recognized the header protocol in the first 2 lines, a Thovari Reach mutual defense ping, the kind that fires automatically when a registered convoy takes hostile contact. The Reach was a 3-species trade cluster 41 light-years to our galactic east. I had a reference file on them. We all did, the way you keep reference files on neighbors you have never actually met. The ping should have carried 3 confirmation lines, 1 per registered member species. That is how the compact's architecture worked. 3 members, 3 ships called, 3 acknowledgement slots in the beacon header. My board showed 4. I stared at that for a moment. The 4th line was not garbled, not a ghost echo. It was a clean acknowledgement address routed to the Carrow's comm register. I traced the routing tag back through the beacon's relay architecture, layer by layer, through 4 levels of automated handoff and 2 protocol versions that predated my entire career. At the bottom of it, I found a procedural annex that had last been touched when a human diplomat named Alara Von, whose name I now know and whose file I have since read in full, signed a witness block at a ratification ceremony on the Thovari station Orothen, 203 years ago, as a professional courtesy. I said the name out loud once, quietly, in the empty comms bay. Alara Von, 203 years dead, and still doing her job. The annex's automated response clause was 4 paragraphs long. I read all of it. It used very specific language. Co-signatories shall receive emergency notification concurrent with primary members. Not may receive. Shall. Nobody had looked at that clause since it was written. The compact had been amended 7 times in the intervening 2 centuries, and nobody had ever audited whether the witness annex still pointed at an active Earthcomms register. It did. It pointed at patrol sector out of F. It pointed at the Carrow. I printed the clause, walked it to the captain's cabin, and knocked. Captain Oren Vessel was 43 years old and had the temperament of a man who preferred problems that had established procedures. He read the clause twice, looked at the beacon confirmation, and said nothing for about 8 seconds. Where? He said. Convoy Corridor Veth 7. 41 light-years. He looked at our patrol chart. We were the only ship in range. The closest Earth vessel that was not us was the cruiser Aldgate, 91 light-years out on a flag assignment. Transit time. 6 hours at emergency jump. Beacon timestamp was 12 minutes ago. He handed me back the printout. Set transit for Veth 7. That was all. I went back to the comms bay and laid in the jump. No one asked whether we were authorized. The annex said shall, and Captain Vessel was the kind of man who took that word seriously when it was printed in a document that had been signed before his grandparents were born. I woke the crew at 0326. I told them what I had found. I told them what the annex said and where we were going and why. I read them the co-signatory clause out loud in the crew briefing room, which holds 14 people when everyone is pressed in, and which is not a comfortable space for unusual news. The crew's reaction was quiet, which I had expected. The Carrow's people tended toward quiet reactions. Chief Engineer Marate, who was the kind of engineer who needed to understand the full shape of a problem before she could function, asked to see the relay routing diagram. I sent it to her board. She studied it for a moment and said, 203 years. Not a question. Just the number, out loud, to fix it in place. We jumped at 0329. I spent the 6 transit hours writing a contact report to Fleet and reading everything in the Carrow's database about the Thovari Reach. 3 species. The Thovari themselves, copper-gold plumage, broad-shouldered, hierarchical and formal in their communications. The Soval, smaller and quick, their merchant class making up the majority of registered convoy tonnage, and the Cathan, who contributed most of the Reach registered warships. Their mutual defense architecture was old and built for a different threat environment than this one. Their registered warships were designed to fight together, as a coordinated 3-ship formation. A single frigate from a species nobody had remembered to invite was not in any of their contingency documents. I searched the compact's appendices for references to Earth. I found two, both in the witness annex. Elara Von's signature and the co-signatory clause she had inadvertently activated from 2 centuries in the past. Nothing else. Carrow dropped out of transit at 0929, 14 minutes before the beacon's tactical window closed. The debris was visible before our sensors had finished their sweep. 2 hull masses, both consistent with Reach warship configuration, Cathan registry, based on the silhouette fragments. They had been struck hard and fast. The debris field was not old. The thermal bloom from the hull fractures was still measurable, which meant they had gone down inside the last 7 hours. Our sensors found drive trails consistent with a 6-ship interdiction screen that had come in organized and hit the registered warships first, deliberately. The Cathan ships had been the primary targets because they were the ones with teeth, and someone on the other side had known that. I did not say anything about the Cathan ships on the open channel. There was nothing useful to say. From the debris pattern, they had not gone down without accounting for themselves. The interdiction screen's formation showed a gap where a 7th ship had been, and the gap was the kind left by a vessel that had been removed at cost. The Cathan ships had bought time. There just had not been enough of it. The 3rd Reach warship was still alive. Barely. She was a Soval-registered patrol cutter listing badly to her port quarter, running on secondary power, her comm output reduced to automated distress repetition on the Reach's own emergency frequency. She had no weapons left online. I could read that from her power signature. The refugee carrier was behind her. A Soval merchant class vessel, 4,200 gross tonnage, converted for high-capacity passenger transport. I read 900 souls aboard from her life sign emission. She was holding station, engines cut, perhaps hoping that stillness would make her harder to target. It would not. The interdiction screen was still present. 6 ships, holding a containment arc around the carrier. They had not fired on the Soval cutter because firing on a crippled ship costs munitions, and they had time. They were waiting for her to go dark on her own. We came out of transit at their 12 o'clock, where they were not expecting anything to be. It took them 43 seconds to reorient toward us. That is a long time for a coordinated interdiction screen. They had been planning to work through a list, and we were not on it. I watched them recalibrate on the tactical display and thought, briefly and without pride, that confusion is its own kind of advantage and we were probably going to need every version of it we could get. I broadcast on the Reach's emergency frequency and our own in parallel. I identified us by hull name, Earth registry, and the beacon clause number. I said we were responding to the Thovari Reach emergency beacon per the procedural witness annex, co-signatory response, 2 century clause. I said it in Soval trade standard, then in the compact's formal register, then in plain English. Nothing moved for a moment. The carrier's comm operator broke the silence. She asked, in Soval trade standard, who we were. We are the Carrow, I said. We are responding to your beacon. A pause. Then, you are not a Reach member. No, I said. We are a co-signatory. There is a distinction. Captain Vessel did not wait for the carrier's opinion on the distinction. The Carrow was already moving. What happened in the next 40 minutes I have reconstructed from the sensor logs, because I was not watching the screens. I was managing comms, keeping the carrier captain informed, coordinating with the Soval cutter's automated systems, relaying status to Earth Fleet on a delay channel. I can tell you what the logs record. The interdiction screen engaged us within 90 seconds. They outmassed us in aggregate by a factor close to 4 and were better armed ship for ship. What they were not was organized for a contact from a direction they had not modeled. Captain Vessel understood, correctly, that we did not need to win the engagement. We needed to make it expensive enough and long enough for the carrier to build a jump window, which takes 14 minutes under the best conditions and longer under fire. Carrow took 3 hits in the first exchange. 1 opened the forward cargo bay to vacuum. We lost 14 meters of hull plating off the starboard bow. The lights in the comms bay went red and stayed there, and I remember the internal pressure alarm cycling twice before the compartmentalization system caught up. We were still firing. Vessel put 2 of the interdiction ships out of the engagement in the next 6 minutes. Disabled, their weapons arrays gone dark, their maneuvering reduced. They were not destroyed, but they were no longer holding containment positions. The arc had gaps. I watched the carrier's drive output climb on my secondary display. She was building toward jump threshold. At 11 minutes, I told her she was close enough. She said, how long could we hold? I looked at our board. 2 of 3 weapons batteries still online. Hull breach confirmed in 2 sectors. Engine output at 68% and falling. Long enough, I said. Go now. She jumped. The engagement wound down after that. When a containment operation loses its target, the math changes. The 4 remaining interdiction ships were not inclined to press a fight with a damaged Earth frigate for a corridor they no longer needed. They withdrew. It took another 11 minutes, and we traded fire through most of those 11 minutes, but they pulled out and we were left with the debris field and the listing shovel cutter and a hull that was going to require more attention than our repair bay was designed to give it. We pulled alongside the cutter and confirmed her crew of 9 alive. We took them aboard. The shovel cutter's automated log had captured our entire engagement. Transit arrival, identification, the broadcast, the fight, the carrier's jump. I appended that log to my contact report and sent both to fleet. Then I went back to the work of damage assessment. I did not let myself look at the debris field for very long. The follow-up correspondence took 3 weeks to arrive. So Van Death was the senior relay analyst at the Thovari Reach Emergency Coordination Station, a watchtower post 2 systems from the VETH-7 corridor. She had received the beacon confirmation log as part of her station's standard post-incident review. She told me in her letter, written in the careful, formal style of someone translating across multiple registers of courtesy and doing it well, that she had read the log 4 times before she trusted the number. 4 pings sent. 3 registered respondents. 1 co-signatory. She had pulled the original compact documents. She had found the witness annex. She had read the co-signatory clause, she wrote, with the expression she suspected she wore when reading something a 5th time and still not believing it was accurate. She had then verified the routing trace, confirmed the 2-century timestamp on a Laravon signature, and sat with that information for what she described, with Thovari formality, as a considerable interval. She did not write to me about the 2 lost Reach warships or their crews. That weight belonged to the Reach, and she kept it there, out of her letter to me. She wrote about the carrier. 911 souls aboard at the time of the jump. All confirmed arrived safely at their registered destination. The carrier captain had given a full account to the Reach Incident Review Board, and so Van had been present for it, and she wrote that the carrier captain had used the word 4th to describe us 4 separate times in her testimony, always with a pause before it, as if the word still surprised her each time it came out of her mouth. So Van closed the letter with 1 line in Thovari formal register. I ran it through the translation archive. The archive offered several possible readings, flagging register ambiguity in the closing phrase. The cleanest translation was this: the witness annex did not know what it was signing for. Apparently, neither did we. I showed it to Captain Vessel. He read it, set it down on the chart table, and looked at the stars through the viewport for a moment. Then he said we needed to get the forward hull patched before the Carrow could go back on patrol. We went back to work.